Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 10 of Ark's creatures that are well known to non-Ark players. But just before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe as it really does help the channel. In at number 10 is the Theri. Now, Theris also have another nickname called the Tickle Chicken after Freddy Krueger, and some people may also just call them Freddy Krueger because of their long claws. But also on top of all of that, from other things, the Therizinosaurus is a very well-known dino, and when it comes to Ark, if people list Ark dinos, even though they haven't played it before, the Theri will turn up in a load of cases, as it is just such an iconic dinosaur in its manner. This thing is just so recognizable for its big claws. But in terms of its use, this thing is an extremely great Ark harvester, which every player at some point should be aiming to get. The Theri is an insane gatherer of things like wood, thatch, and berries on top of all of that, and I think it can gather meat as well, which makes this thing a really useful herbivore. On top of that, this is by far the best creature to use for the dragon boss fight on the island, as the dragon's fire is really not so kind to carnivorous creatures, but since the Theri is a herbivore, you will be fine with that completely. But the only real downside about the Theri is its healing food. When you want to heal the Theri really quickly, you'll need sweet vegetable cake, and that is really, really expensive. In at number 9 is the Allosaurus. Now, some may mistake this creature to the Rex, but in terms of its model in Ark, this thing is extremely iconic, and from loads of dinosaur movies out there, the Allosaurus is an extremely well-known dinosaur, which is very popular among others, as it is essentially a Rex that is quicker and faster, and somehow in some cases a lot more deadly. And in Ark, in many cases, that is the case. Allosauruses come in packs of 3, and each of those packs will contain a pack alpha, and you will know which one's a pack alpha as they will have an orange glow. But don't mistake the Megatherium's orange glow for a pack buff. That is a completely different thing altogether. Now, with the Allosaurus as well, these things are significantly faster than a creature like the Rex, but I think the Spino is still a bit faster than them. But the Allosaurus also does have good stamina as well. Compared to something like the Rex, they are much better for moving around, and they do not get stuck on all of Ark's objects. Also, compared to the Rex, I don't know why I'm comparing to the Rex so much, these things attack a lot faster, like a significant amount faster. Also, they do have a bleed ability as well, which makes these things extremely useful, as no matter the health of the creature you're fighting, you can still tank loads and loads of damage out of it. And it may work for bosses, but I'm not quite sure about that. The Deinonychus is definitely a better boss creature than the Allosaurus, but the Allosaurus is still a reasonably good boss creature. It only really fails with its health stat, which can be pretty low compared to some other carnivores. But the thing is, with the Allo, it is still a very viable creature, which is 100% worth your tame, and throughout all this B-roll, you've seen me kill a wealth of creatures with it. It is definitely a useful Ark creature, and it is well known with others. If you do pull up a conversation where you say, hey, do you know what an Allosaurus is? Most people will say yes, and you'll just give you the answer that it is a extremely powerful large carnivore. Definitely well known. In at number 7 is the Brontosaurus. Now, this is one of the only herbivores on the list, but it's mainly well known for its extreme size. The Brontosaurus is absolutely massive, and it appears in loads of films again. I feel like a repeating record right now because I keep saying the same things, but really all of these creatures' fame are mainly rooted in the media and films like that. But the thing is, with the Bronto in Ark, this is by far the best berry gatherer you can really get. If you do want to compromise on size a bit though, the Diplo may be a good shout, and the Stego is a great option as well. But if you want the most berries possible and you're on a PvE server, go straight ahead with a Bronto tame. Whereas if you're on a PvP server, you might be a little bit more cautious as they are quite big and they will definitely stand out a lot. So if you're on a PvP server, really watch out. In at number 6 is the Carb Enemies. Now this actually is mainly well known from Ark Mobile, but also this thing does appear quite a lot, and it is definitely a very recognizable creature in Ark. This is a staple, even though it isn't on any Ark wallpaper. It is still extremely well known by the community, as the Ark model for the Carb Enemies is just so well known around many people. If you see this, you either say something like turtle, or if you do know the full name, you will say Carb Enemies. Either way, most people will easily be able to recognize one of these things. Maybe they won't get the full name, but still they'll know it's rooted from Ark, and they will know what this thing is. And if they are further developed, then they'll probably get the name no problems at all. But really, its model just really sums up this creature in so many ways to all of the community. But in terms of the Carb Enemies use, this thing is extremely great in the early game as a sea creature. You may not see it as a sea creature when you actually start out in Ark, but this thing is extremely useful and is definitely worth all of your time trying to tame one of these things. They're definitely very easy, they just require some tranks, no problem at all. Or alternatively, you could easily use something like a club if you're being a bit more risky, but I'd probably go for something like a slingshot in the early game, as they really are not very difficult to tame, as these things are quite slow, but that comes to your advantage. In at number 5 is the Utanus. Now, a lot of people just call this thing the Furry Rex, but in terms of Ark, if you've watched anything, and Ark boss videos are definitely a very popular thing, you will see the UT coming up in loads and loads of those instances, and that is why this thing is well known. In all manner of Ark content, this thing is shown a lot. There are many breeding videos on it, there are so many tutorials on how to get the best UTs out there, and also just for boss videos, the UT is absolutely everywhere, and that is because this thing is pretty much an essential boss creature, as it has two major abilities. It has its Fear Roar, which will debuff the enemy creatures, and it has its much more popular Courage Roar, which will buff your creatures and also debuff the enemy creatures. And that is why this thing is so useful in the cases of bosses, as you can just tank through them so much faster. And if you have it on top of other buffs like the Megatherium has with the Broodmother, it can be an absolutely insane pairing, and you can shred through bosses with 100% ease. You will have no problem if you have a good UT with good buffs, and also if your other creatures are good as well, as you still do need good other Ark creatures to keep up with the UT's absolutely insane abilities. In at number 5 is the Stego. The Stegosaurus is definitely a well-known creature in all kinds of dinosaur media. Even if you look at Tom Scar's Astus movie, a Stegosaurus, although it doesn't appear, its name still appears in those sketches, and over 60 million people have pretty much watched every single one. The Stegosaurus is definitely a very widely well-known creature for things like Jurassic Park as well. Again, I don't know if one of them does actually show up, but still, the Stegosaurus is one of the most iconic creatures, and obviously it's in Ark as well, which is why it's on this list. In terms of the Stego's actual use in the game, it has a really great PvE use, but also a really great PvP use since the TLC update 3.0 came out. Firstly, with its PvE use, this thing is a really great berry harvester. It is absolutely insane for all things berries, and it is actually a reasonable dealer of damage. But in terms of that PvP scenario, it has 3 plate abilities. It has its heavy plate, which is great for gathering wood, its hardened plate, which is really great for soaking turrets, and it also does have the sharpened plate, which is what you'll use for gathering all of those berries right up. The Stego really is so versatile to any Ark player. This thing is a must-have tame at some point in your journey. In at number 4 is the Carno. Now, to anyone out there that watched iBallistic Squid's Ark videos back in the day, all the way back in 2015 and 2016, you will know of the Carnotaurus very well. But to all of you other people that didn't watch those videos, the Carnotaurus is still a very, very widely known Ark creature among many people. This thing is very iconic for many facts that it has around this creature. Like, Carnotauruses are so powerful, they could easily break through something like a safe. And that does appear in many kinds of videos on YouTube and other platforms alike as well. But also with those horns that it has on its head and its tiny arms, this thing is just a really iconic dinosaur that anyone who is vaguely into dinosaurs or has done any research into dinosaurs will easily be able to identify this thing. But in terms of its in-game use, this thing is an extremely good carnivore and an extremely good fighter as well. Its health is reasonably good, it does definitely stack up. Its stamina is a bit lacking in some cases, but overall it is not as bad as a creature like the Rex would have. And also its second attack ability, also known as its headbutt, deals a bleed ability, which is really OP, and I went into it more when I was talking about the Allo. No matter the health of the creature that you are fighting, you're still dealing a percentage of its health in damage, which again is really OP. In at number 3 is the Wyvern. Now, the Wyvern worldwide is just a very well-known thing, and it makes sense why it would be very high on this list. But also, the Wyvern is a very popular Ark creature, and again is very well known among pretty much any human in the world that has any contact with this kind of content that I make and many other content creators make in a similar field. The Wyvern is a dragon-like creature with wings, because yes, some dragons do not have wings. For example, Chinese dragons don't most of the time, some of them do, but either way, the Wyvern is a winged dragon which has a wealth of abilities, usually rooted in things like element. But in this case, Ark goes a bit off with the Fire Wyvern, which just stays the same. Then you have the Poison Wyvern, which is a bit off there. The Ice Wyvern stays en route, but then also you do have the Lightning Wyvern, which doesn't really match the form again. You probably expect Earth, Fire, Wind, Water, and Earth, something along those lines. But with Crystal Wyverns, there are Blood Wyverns and there are Water Wyverns, and there are probably more on top of that. I'm not really the best for studying Crystal Wyverns, but I know there are definitely a few more variants of Crystal Wyverns out there than the ones that I just mentioned. But in Ark, the Wyvern is a great creature, dealing an insane amount of damage. Its turning circle isn't that great, but this thing can pick up a wealth of larger creatures. In at number 2 is the Pteranodon. On top of this thing being a very well-known Ark creature, this is just a very well-known dinosaur overall by so many people out there. The Pteranodon is very iconic, showing up in Jurassic Park and Jurassic World as well. At least I'm pretty sure this thing does show up in Jurassic Park. Either way, it does show up in Jurassic World. And actually, the Pteranodon isn't a dinosaur, it is a pterosaur, but everyone does still call this thing a dinosaur. Either way, like I've said, this thing is extremely well known because of loads of films, and also this thing is just so iconic in its shape, with its horn-like thing rotting out of its head, and also its very dinosaur-like structure, even though this thing has wings. And obviously there are many other creatures like it as well. The Quetzal is an example there. But in terms of its use in Ark, the Pteranodon is an extremely good flyer for those beginner Ark tamers. This thing really isn't that difficult, and its saddle is unlocked at level 38. The only real difficulty is gathering the chitin or keratin required to actually make that saddle. You'd be surprised the Pteranodon actually does a very reasonable amount of melee damage considering it is a flyer, and also this thing is unlocked at level 38. especially its the spin attack ability. This thing is an extremely powerful arc creature when put into good use, especially in PvP scenarios. When you are raiding bases, you can just spam that spin attack and it is so easy to destroy everything inside someone's base, unless it is obviously tech or equivalent to that. Now, the Pteranodon does lack on stamina and weight, sadly, but it is still a tame, 100% worth getting. And finally, in at number 1 is the Rex. Now, would it be a most famous dinosaurs video if the Rex wasn't on this list? Obviously, the Rex was going to turn in right at that number 1 spot. The Rex is by far the world's most iconic dinosaur. You just show any carnivore to the general person, and if they have little dinosaur knowledge, they will just say it is a T-Rex. This dinosaur is by far one of the most worldwide spread carnivores, and this thing is so iconic in all of its features. Its big head, its big teeth, its iconically chunky and long tail, and its insane stomp and roar, even though it didn't really have a roar like we would think it would have a roar, as it patrolled that Cretaceous landscape of when it existed over 66 million years ago. In terms of the Rex's use in Ark, this thing is an extremely useful creature that is mainly used for bosses, as this thing is a very balanced Ark tame, which really does matter, as long as those stats which are balanced are actually good stats in the first place. The Rex has a very solid health stat, a very solid melee stat. Its stamina is a bit lacking, and so is its weight, but that really does not matter when you're in a combat situation. The Rex is truly one of the best creatures for combat, and especially with X variants on Genesis Part 1, these things can be upgraded even further to the next level. Sadly, that is the end of today's video. But either way, I want to know your top 10 in the comments down below, so make sure to drop it down before you leave, and I will see you all later. Bye.